Florida.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Madam President, I think this is an issue that's been talked about. There's a lot of interest in it, and rightfully so. In China, even as I speak to you now, human beings working as slaves because of their ethnicity and their religion, Uyghur Muslims, are in factories making products that people will buy this holiday season and throughout the year. I think it would be shocking to most Americans. I think it would be shocking to all of us to know that even as I stand here now, there are products in this very chamber in the Senate that were touched by and made by the hands of slaves. It is a horrifying, horrifying human rights situation, fully sanctioned, as we now know, by the government of China, the Communist Party of China. We know this, by the way. The New York Times had access to these documents for a long time, and they were finally revealed, that show that this plan to use slave labor went to the highest levels of that Communist Party. I think it is also appalling that it reveals the level of dependence this country has and the need we have to rebuild our industrial base in this country and in allied nations. Appalling because it is the fact that we are so dependent on China in our supply chain, and that many have asked us to look the other way, to not complain about this, to not pass a bill about this, because it would disrupt supply chains. Well, what they really mean is it would disrupt the bottom line, their profits. I don't need to explain to anybody how this works. You can make a lot of money if you don't have to pay your workers or pay them very little. It allows you to undercut your competition. So the fact that we have major American corporations, and for that matter, international corporations, multinational corporations, who are making money, whose profits are driven by the fact that slaves are building and making the materials they sell to us, is a horrifying reality. We have worked on this in a bipartisan way for 2 years, and we have fortunately now reached a point. And as you recall, I was here 2 weeks ago objecting to an amendment package on the NDAA to force action. I want to recognize Congressman McGovern, who is our House counterpart, and obviously the junior senator from Oregon, who's going to speak in a moment here in the Senate. It's been a bipartisan effort. We passed legislation on this last year. Differences between the House and Senate kept it from becoming law. We passed it unanimously out of the Senate earlier this year. But there were differences between our approach. And since that time where the amendment package was objected to on the defense bill, the House has passed not one, but 2 versions of this bill. And we are now in possession of one of those 2 versions. And it is a version that doesn't have any objections here in the Senate either. I wish we didn't have to pass this bill. There have been some in the hallway that have suggested, I don't know if the right word is congratulations, but commenting on how far we've come, and my argument is nothing to be happy about, because even when we pass this bill, there will still be people working as slaves. I wish that this not even exist, but it does, and we must address it. And so we are now virtually just a couple of moves away, and it may not happen today, unfortunately, for reasons you're about to learn unrelated to this. But we are a couple moves away from being able to send this to the White House for the president to sign and for it to become law. And I think it would be a powerful statement to make, but also impactful. A bill that says if you are a company who makes things or sources material from these parts of China, you're going to have to prove that slaves didn't make it before you can bring it into this country. And I hope that if we can do that here, that other countries around the world will follow suit. If I may, Madam President, I wanted to yield to the junior senator of Oregon, who has worked side by side with us on this and has been a key part of this, to issue his comments on it as well.
Thank you. I join with my colleague from Florida, Senator Rubio, in calling out genocide in China. It's a terrible term describing horrific acts in which humanity assaults humanity. And just 7 weeks from now, 7 weeks from this Friday, there's going to be the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games in China, and there's going to be fancy dances by minorities from across the country, and China will be saying to the world, see what a beautiful country we have with all this diversity, including people from Xinjiang province, the Uyghurs. Behind those fancy performances in the opening ceremonies, there is a very, very ugly truth. That ugly truth is that the Chinese government is committing genocide against the Uyghur population. More than 1 million Uyghurs are enslaved, and they're enslaved to produce products for the world for the profit of China. And I don't think anyone in America wants us to be complicit in genocide by buying these products. That's what this bill is all about. It's to say, companies, when you produce things in Xinjiang, make sure that the supply chain is investigated and is untainted by these horrific acts. This is bipartisan. This is bicameral. This is the best of the American spirit. And so I strongly, strongly support passage of this act. We've passed it before, as my colleague just mentioned. We passed it unanimously. And now we have a version that has been worked out with the House version. It is ready to roll. So, colleagues, let's get this done as a powerful statement of where America stands on human rights, a powerful statement that we are against genocide, a powerful statement that when it comes to these human rights principles, we stand together, Democrat and Republican, House and Senate. I extend my appreciation to our colleagues in the House, Congressman Smith and Congressman McGovern. We all work together on the Congressional Executive Commission on China. We've held a series of hearings to understand better not just the horrific acts that are occurring in Xinjiang, but also the horrific acts that are happening in Tibet and in Hong Kong. But this bill focuses on the genocide against the Uyghurs. Let's get this done. It matters. Let's act now.
Senator from
As of a legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of House Resolution 6256, which was received from the House, that the bill be considered, read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, first let me thank the Senator from Florida and the Senator from Oregon for the really important work that they've done on the underlying legislation. It is of critical importance that this Senate stand together, Republicans and Democrats, against the ongoing genocide that is occurring in China today. And I will say that despite all of the news about division in this chamber, the coming together around China policy, the coming together between both parties over the course of 2021 with respect to the threat that China presents to the United States and the global world order, and the threat they present to human rights, both domestically and externally, I think is important. I support the underlying legislation, but I also want to make sure that we have the personnel in place that can effectuate the policy. Good policy occurs when the Congress steps up and hands the executive branch a tool that they can use, but we need craftsmen who can effectuate that tool set. Pending on the calendar today, I would argue, are over a dozen nominees that would be in charge of implementing policy in and around China. The Assistant Secretary for International Organizations, the Assistant Secretary for Near East Affairs, the Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees, and Migration, ambassadors to Bangladesh, Brunei, Japan, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, all pending on the calendar today. But perhaps the three most important nominees that will implement the policy that Senator Rubio and Senator Wyden are bringing forward today are these. First, the nominee to be the ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns, the nominee to be Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, who would oversee this new policy, Ramin Toloui, and lastly, the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, obviously critical to the plight of the Uyghurs, Rashad Hussain. In particular, Ambassador Burns is uniquely qualified for this post, having been ambassador to NATO and ambassador to Greece, At his hearing, he made clear how he would view the Chinese behavior in Xinjiang province. He said the PRC's genocide, its abuse in Tibet, its smothering of Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms, and its bullying of Taiwan are unjust and must stop. Having an ambassador in China in place, having an assistant secretary of state for economic and business affairs, and having an ambassador working every single day on international religious freedom hand in hand with this new legislation gives the tools and the legislative authority necessary to get the United States moving towards the right side of human rights in China. So with that, Madam President, I would ask the senator from Florida to modify his request to include the following request. I would ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, if applicable, at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Republican leader, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations. Executive Calendar number 525, Nicholas Burns of Massachusetts to be Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United States of America to the People's Republic of China. Calendar number 626, Ramin Taloui of Iowa to be an Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs. Calendar number 619, Rashad Hussain of Virginia to be Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. That there be 10 minutes for debate equally divided in the usual form on the nominations en bloc. That upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. That if a nomination is confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. That no further motions be in order to the nominations, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection to the modification?
Madam President,
The senator from Florida.
reserving the right to object, as modified, this would mean the passage of the Uyghur slave labor measure, which has unanimous support, and would put us on the precipice and on track to confirm nominees as ambassadors to China, an important Secretary of State post, and also an ambassador for international religious freedom. I would have no objection to that modification.
The request has been modified. Is there objection to the request as modified?
Madam President, reserving the right to object.
The senator from Oregon.
Madam President, let me just say at the outset, I strongly agree with my colleague, Senator Rubio, my friend from Oregon, Senator Merkley, that the United States has to fight genocide and the scourge of forced labor taking place in Western China and elsewhere around the world. As the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, one of my special priorities, one that we've worked on for quite some time, has been to tackle this issue of forced labor. It goes back to work that Senator Brown and I did in 2015 to close an unjustifiable loophole that allows an exception to the ban on products made with forced labor. Not only is it morally abhorrent, it is also a major trade ripoff that undermines American workers. On the Finance Committee, we believe that the Senate needs to look at every opportunity to protect good-paying American jobs and help workers and their families get ahead. That means that the Senate has got to be prepared to tackle multiple challenges at once. Right now, Madam President and colleagues, the urgent issue for so many American families is the potential expiration of child tax credit payments on January 1st. Families received their 6th child tax credit payment today. It could be the last, Madam President, if this body does not act. Families have come to depend on these payments to cover essentials like rent and groceries, heat and clothing for their kids. Just recently, I was home in Oregon, and I asked people what they spend the child tax credit on. And they said, Ron, we spend it on things like shoes. And in our part of the world, Madam President, it gets cold, it gets wet. We're not talking about luxuries, we're talking about shoes for children. Food insecurity among families dropped by about 25% since these child tax credit payments began. Child poverty, we're in a position to cut it nearly in half. This program, in my view, is like Social Security for kids and vulnerable families. We never let Social Security checks for vulnerable seniors lapse. For anybody who questions how valuable this program has been to American families, I wanted to just very briefly touch on a few messages that we've gotten from parents in a cross-section of communities across the country about how the child tax credit has helped them. Parent in Kentucky, quote, "It helped me with fuel for my car, provided me enough to buy my daughter a few things she needed. A parent in New York, it's helped take the burden off our family. My husband lost his job during COVID, but since found another job. But the gap of the job loss was so heavy. Parent in Alabama, I was able to buy my daughter her school clothes. A parent in New Hampshire, it's helped me tremendously, especially when school was starting." So the message from American parents from sea to shining sea is the child tax credit has been vital to so many American families in lowering the cost of raising a family and ensuring they can provide that basic level of security all children deserve. So at this point, Madam President, I would ask, would the senator from Florida modify his request to include the adoption of my amendment that is at the desk to extend the child tax credit for 1 year and pass the bill as amended?
Is there objection to the further modification?
Madam President,
Senator from Florida.
reserving the right to object. As I understand this further modification, it would say, let's take a bill that is meaningful on an important global issue, something, an important human rights issue, that everyone here supports, that we can pass right now, today, and send to the president. He could sign it tonight or tomorrow morning, and it becomes law because everyone supports it using this process we're using here. And in addition to that, set up votes on two nominees and an assistant secretary at a time when speech after speech out here has been about how we're not getting to these nominees and assistant secretaries. So we can do all that, but only if we add to it something that has bipartisan opposition that no matter what, at least 50 people here are against. It cannot pass unanimously. And even if it could, and it did pass, we'd have to send it back over to the House, not to the president, and the House isn't even in session until January 10th. That doesn't sound like a good arrangement to me, and it's something that I would have to object to.
Is there objection to the original request?
Reserving my right to object, Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Madam President. I listened carefully to my colleague from Florida, and because of his objection, there isn't going to be an opportunity for the Senate to take two bold steps tonight. I already indicated, made it very clear, that I am completely sympathetic to my colleague from Florida, my colleague from Oregon, to the fight against genocide and forced labor. They got me at hello on their proposition. I also feel incredibly strongly about our vulnerable children and our vulnerable families that are going to be cut off from an essential lifeline unless the United States Senate acts. And unfortunately, because of the objection from my colleague from Florida, we're not going to have a chance to take two bold steps tonight. That's what I'm for. That's what I believe the American people are for. You bet we're against forced labor. You bet we're against genocide. But we also have had a long tradition of standing up for vulnerable kids, vulnerable families, and tonight we could have attained two bold objectives here in the United States Senate. I think it's unfortunate that my colleague from Florida is unwilling to do that. Vulnerable families are going to be hurt as a result of the objection. I just want the Senate to know there was another way, Madam President, there was another way we could have stood with the effort to deal with genocide and forced labor and protected families. They weren't mutually exclusive. We could have done both. I think it's unfortunate the Senate's not doing it. I yield the floor. Oh, I object.
Objection is heard.